I want to pay a very special tribute to Dr. Bernard Cohen. And this is something that, at least in my time as a dean, but Nathan, maybe you did this when you were dean, to pay tribute to somebody who's been a very special faculty member over many years, and that's Dr. Bernard Cohen. I want to read something about his career. It's been a remarkable life and career of Bernard Cohen. Dr. Cohen's relationship to Mount Sinai spans 6 decades, beginning in 1954, when he was a rotating intern at Mount Sinai Hospital, returning 6 years later as an assistant attending neurologist. He was among the first faculty appointed to the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai when the school opened in 1968. Dr. Cohen devoted his career to studying the vestibular control of natural movement in animals and humans, and this is unbelievable, was continuously funded by the National Institutes of Health and NASA from 1962 until he closed his laboratory last year. That's 54 years of nonstop funding. I think that's actually the record at NIH. I'm going to say that again. I mean, 54 years is like impossible, but he did it. His insights into the physiological basis of the relationship between the vestibular system and the control of eye movement are legendary. He collaborated with NASA and the Russian space program to study the effects of microgravity on vestibular reflexes, twice taking his laboratory to Moscow to fly monkeys in space. He also oversaw the launch of the first human centrifuge into space by NASA, testing astronauts' reactions to linear acceleration and microgravity. In addition, more recently, Dr. Cohen's discovery that velocity storage integrator underlies the cause of motion sickness led to the first successful cure for a disease called Mal-de-Broglie syndrome, a condition marked by continuous rocking, swaying, and bobbing after sea voyages. Dr. Cohen complemented his research with a busy clinical practice focused on the causes and treatment of vertigo. He's been an active educator, served as vice chair of the Department of Neurology. With publications approaching 300, his contributions to the physiology of eye movements and their neural substrate are considered to be among the most outstanding in the world literature. For 40 years, Dr. Cohen occupied the Dr. Morris Bender Professor of Neurology Endowed Chair. And you'll hear from Dr. Vickery that we are now awarding that chair to another investigator. It was named after his mentor and colleague, a renowned chair of neurology at Mount Sinai. Dr. Cohen has graciously endorsed the installation of Dr. Joanna Jen into that chair at today's ceremony. Tenacious, pioneering, vigorous, enthusiastic, sophisticated, these are the terms that have been used to describe Dr. Cohen and his work. We thank him for his lifelong commitment to Mount Sinai, and we honor his extraordinary scientific, educational, and clinical contributions. Please join me in a heartfelt round of applause for Dr. Bernard Cohen. He's going to talk, and then we'll take the picture.
Okay.
Would you like to?
Oh, you have? All right, thank you, Dean Charney. And thanks to the many friends and colleagues that have come to this very lovely ceremony. Actually, over the course of my career, I've seen a great deal of Mount Sinai history. Mount Sinai, which started as a Jewish hospital in 1852, had moved uptown And at the time that I came, it was a renowned institution in the world already, with very fine clinicians and researchers. In 1966, the medical school started, and from that point on, we then pushed forward. And one of the things that was so striking about it was that the physician researchers who had been at Mount Sinai made many important discoveries that amplified and helped medical science go forward. For example, blood transfusion was started here at Mount Sinai back around the time of World War I. And Bernard Sachs, the first chair of neurology, was the first to write about an Ashkenazi Jewish children's disease, Tay-Sachs disease, which later proved to be very important in genetic understanding. Also, Crohn and Ginsburg described ulcerative colitis for the first time, another Mount Sinai tradition. And we recently have found the first cure for a syndrome that is now very prevalent, known as the mal de débarquement syndrome, which occurs mainly in women, but in some men, when they get off a cruise ship. And cruises now are very popular, and these patients with mal de débarquement syndrome also are quite popular. One of our colleagues, Dr. Mingjia Dai, who was here in the auditorium. Dai, would you stand? He's here. Anyhow, he discovered the cure for the mal de débarquement syndrome, and it came out of our research that had gone on for many years. I also, by the way, would like to acknowledge the fact that I'm standing here in good health, not because I haven't had any illnesses, but because I'm now in the 31st year after suffering malignant breast cancer and having been treated and succored by and nurtured by Dr. James Holland, one of our remarkable oncologists. Fortunately, Dr. Holland is here, and I would like to express my gratitude to him for his long-standing care of me. We began to study the vestibular system when I returned in 1962 from Columbia, where I had done neurophysiology and had learned modern electronic techniques, mainly from Tektronix and some other electronics manufacturers. And I coupled with a Japanese otoneurologist, Junichi Suzuki, who came from the University of Tokyo to work with Morris Bender, my mentor and first chair. Junichi Suzuki was an expert at isolating the nerves of the individual semicircular canals, and I then knew how to stimulate those nerves. And we then began to stimulate and immediately produced extremely powerful eye movements. I would like to say, what is the vestibulo-ocular reflex? The vestibulo-ocular reflex is something that evolved hundreds of millions of years ago and is present in all vertebrates and mammals, and we have it as well. And it turns out that we really didn't know much about it. But then when we began to stimulate and examine the eye movements of cats, dogs, rabbits, and monkeys, we were then able to understand the basics of that system. That led us in about 10 years to understand with Theodore Rafan, a a scientist engineer from Brooklyn College, and now a distinguished professor of what was referred to before as a velocity storage integrator. What is an integrator? An integrator can take an acceleration signal and integrate it and make it into a velocity signal, which turns out to be the currency of much of the activity that goes on in the back of your brain in the vestibular nuclei.
I'd like to thank you for all the work that you have done. I don't think everybody's going to understand all the fantastic science.
I want to say two things more,
Okay.
if you don't mind. Okay, following that, we then were able to discover, that motion sickness, as you pointed out, comes from this velocity storage integrator, and now with the mal de débarquement syndrome, we've treated over 400 people, and we're essentially the only place in the world that has successful treatment for it. Two things bother me. One, it bothers me that many of our students have enormous debt when they come to medical school, and we need physician scientists who are going to push forward. The second thing is, as referred to by Dr. Davis, we need research money from the NIH, from NASA, from the NSF, to keep maintaining a steady state of research. Research on the brain is extraordinarily interesting, and our next step in vestibular research is to go into the cerebellum. And fortunately, Dr. Vickery has recruited a wonderful neuroscientist from UCLA, Joanna Jen, who will come here and push our research into the cerebellum. I have to say I'm looking forward to it with great anticipation and excitement.